So those that haven't met me yet, I'm Jason Barker, the education chair. We're going to talk about fermentation temperature control. If you don't know why that's important, it's really important. Okay, the temperature that the yeast ferment at, it affects the flavors that they make. We may talk about that at some future education session, but for now we're just going to assume that you know controlling the temperature of your fermentation is important. So I've got two helpers tonight that offered. Actually, this was Russ Eisenberg's idea, like what, 9 months ago or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, he came to me and said, hey, we need to do this, and I'm willing to help. So I super appreciate that. Thank you, Russ. And then Chuck joined in to help too. Chuck's one of our kind of up-and-coming brewers. He's getting a little better. Those of you that don't know, Chuck is very accomplished. So anyway, so we're going to talk about this. So thank you to those guys. We're going to keep it really informal and just kind of talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these things. They're going to jump in and talk about what they're experts in. Okay, so how do you control the temperature of your fermentation? Back in the day, and some places still in Europe, you could get a cave. So just dig out your basement and get a cave. But no, these are actual fermentation chambers in Germany, both of these. And they use caves because the temperatures stay within 5 degrees year round. Now back in the early days of brewing, you know, we're talking, I don't know, 500 plus years ago, you know, they didn't have refrigeration. So this is how they controlled that, is just putting them in caves to be able to control their environment. They also brewed to season, which is really important. If you think about how beer styles evolved and yeast strains evolved, it had to do with their seasons, okay? Which yeast performs at what temperatures? Lagers perform better at lower temperatures, ale at higher temperatures. Belgian strains, a lot of them even are higher alcohol tolerant and create the flavors and aromas that we're used to. So when we go through all the different ways to control your fermentation temperature, we're going to go from really low budget to really high budget. This is low budget, meaning just brew to season, right? Just use brewing to your advantage. Don't be starting a lager right now. Don't be starting a lager in June, July, August when it's 90 degrees. That's kind of silly. Start with the California Common, which is the most temperature tolerant lager strain out there. But you know, brew to season. So the next step up is space heaters. I still use a lot of this type of method for my brewing depending on the beer I'm making and the temperature that it is outside. So I have an extra room since my son moved out several years ago. It's nice to have an extra room. It's my brewing room. And so to be able to, and it sounds silly, well, space heaters, well, no duh. Well, that way you can maintain that temperature exactly what you want in the winter time, okay? We're talking about temperature control, cooling things down and warming things up. So with space heaters, warming things up. So with a simple space heater that you can buy anywhere, as long as you have a thermometer in that room, you can really maintain a pretty good temperature. If it's lower than 70 degrees outside, like it is, what, 8 months out of the year here in Portland area, you can maintain pretty darn good temperature control under 70 degrees and keep it within 5 degrees day to night. And we'll get into later how I know that you can do that with monitoring those temperatures ahead of time. So I'm going to use my laser. That space heater, right? Just real simple in a room. Now that's not super efficient because you're heating the entire room for something that you may need for just a little thing. But then see this little guy here on the right, see that little space heater right there? This is in a fermentation chamber or a refrigerator or something that this guy built, and it's temperature controlled, so he's got a little space heater set up right there. So you can also space heat just a little bitty space. Now, that doesn't mean that's a perfect setup because I have issues with the way this is set up, but we'll kind of get to that later. That will create a really hot spot right there on that beer. If that thing turns on, when it turns on, it's going to heat that part of the beer really hot, but that's beside the point. Okay, So this is the #1 way I make all my ales, and that's the simple swamp cooler. Chuck's going to help me out with this in just a second. It's so simple. One of those giant Rubbermaid totes you get from anywhere, Target. And put your fermenter in it, fill it full of water. You can heat or cool the water to whatever pitching temperature you want, 65 to 70 degrees-ish, whatever. Put your thermometer in there and adjust it. Hot, cold taps of water coming out till you get it just right. And then you can maintain that temperature even in really high temperatures by putting ice in there. Ice water bottles or ice. Looks like this guy actually has both. There's a bag of ice and there's some water bottles. And then monitoring the temperature of that water twice a day. I mean, we all have jobs, right? So I would get up in the morning, check the temperature of that water, see where it's at. If I needed to add ice, I would add a little ice. I come home at night, see where it's at, add ice. As it turns out, since I'm lucky enough to have air conditioning in my house, I never have to add ice, really. The temperatures never get over 75, and usually if I want, I can just, for the first 3 or 4 days of fermentation, crank my AC down and open all the vents in that room. But if you don't have AC, this ice method is really good, and you can practice it ahead of time. This is important. So you're going to go home and say, okay, I'm going to do this thing that Jason told me how to do, and you'll mess it up because you'll either put too much ice or not enough, and the temperature swings on this beer you're trying to make is going to go up and down, and it's going to be all phenolic and bad, right? And then you're going to come back to me and wag your finger and go, Jason, you told me to do this. Try this first. Just take that tote, fill it full of your water, and monitor it for a week with temperatures. Don't put any beer in it yet. Just monitor it. Test it. Get your skill down then of how to, oh, okay, if I put 2 of the little bitty bottles of ice in there, that lowers it 4 degrees or whatever. Do that practice ahead of time, so then you know, okay, when I put the beer in there, I know about what it's going to be, the temperature of the room versus the temperature of the water. So practice it first. Okay, Chuck, I'll let you kind of expound on the swamp cooler.
So I do things just a little bit different than Jason. I don't use any ice. So well, because I don't have enough ice out of my freezer in the house. So what I do is that instead of using that jacket, I use towels. And what I do is that I have a container like that. So after I've I did the boil and I got my wort in a fermenter, I chill it down with my chill plate to about 65 degrees. Then I take it in the house, and I have a downstairs shower that nobody uses. So it's got a great drain. It's perfect. And I put the carboy in there with about 5 inches of water, wrap the towel around it all nice and wet, and I put a fan on it. I have 3 speeds. So initially I put it on the low temperature because the wort's starting cold and the yeast haven't really kicked in. The reason I put a fan on it, I know that within a day that temperature of that wort's going to start increasing, and I don't want to get it above 68 degrees. So with the fan, I go from speed 1, speed 2, speed 3. It starts blowing that cooler air just across the towel that's wrapped around the fermenter, and I can keep it at 66 degrees for the first 5 days. Just with the speed of the fan and keeping the towel wrapped around the carboy. That works really good because I don't want my wort to get above 70 degrees. And it's really easy to tell when you're past that first 3 days with the high krausen, it starts dying down a little bit. Then I start dropping the fan speed, I take the towel off, and at some point, about the 4th, 5th day in, I take the carboy right out of the water and I just let it at my house temperature, and my wife gets on me about this, but I keep the house at 68 degrees. Even in the summertime, I keep it at 68 degrees. I might let it go up to 70 after it's been fermenting for about a week, but during the first 3 or 4 days of the beer in the house is at 68. And so she's sitting on the couch, she's got the comfort around, and it's like 100 degrees out. I don't want to get in that too much, but because you can drop the temperature too low and not allow the yeast to actually kick in. You can drop it down to 63, 62 degrees really quick if you have the fan on too high. So I kind of got my own fan. I know how it works. It's like a 30-year-old fan. And This is really basic, where you don't have to have a big refrigerator or cooler. You don't have to have a freeze box, and you can do it in your house in a spare spot. Works great in my downstairs shower because it has a drain and nobody ever uses the shower. Questions on that?
The price of a refrigerator is about worth 3 comforters and a happy wife, don't you think?
I'm still married after 35 years, so this is still working out for me.
For 20 of those, weren't you on a submarine?
Towel kits right now. I mean, like, we were having to get it. Like, I would check it a couple times a day, and every time it went in, the towel would be dry.
I have my towel, when I have it wrapped around the carboy, it's still in the water. So it's always absorbing out of the bottom of the carboy and bringing it up to the top. I've never had a towel go dry. So maybe it went dry because it wasn't immersed.
So, yeah, I didn't have it in a bucket. I just had a wet towel wrap.
Yeah, it will definitely dry out. So you want to have it, when I have my carboy in here and I have the towel wrapped around it, the towel is actually in the water and wet all the way to the top.
So it wicks the water up.
It's wicking it up consistently and providing a cooling element on the outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Such an
How do you monitor the temperature of your water?
I used to use the little stickers that you put on the side. Now I have a temperature gun. And I use that. And that's more, to me, more accurate.
Laser.
Yeah, it's like a laser gun. Yeah, and they're like $10. You can get them on Amazon. And I use that.
Harbor Freight sells them. And
Yeah, that's what I use for all my beers now for measuring the temperature to work.
So
I don't-
it never touches the beer, it never gets inside the beer?
No, it reads it right. And I use plastic carboys now. I've switched from glass to all plastic because for me it's a hazard using glass, and plastic is easier to handle the weight. And I can read the temperature right through the plastic carboy at the temperature to work, and it's right on every time.
Would that work with glass? Would that also work if it's...
Yes, it will still work with glass. The only reason I use glass is because the weight of the glass, and I'm worried about breaking glass. That's the only reason.
We're not getting old, young.
No.
It's heavy.
It's heavy, yeah.
You're not, I am.
So yeah, I'm not getting any younger either. So, questions on that? You can do this anywhere where you have some drainage that, and actually where you don't have drainage, but where you have a fan that can blow consistently. And the cooler your house is, obviously, it makes it a little easier. But even in houses that are over 70 degrees, you can still keep your work chill below 70 with this process for the first 3 or 4 days while the height of krausen is happening and that temperature is trying to raise 7, 8 degrees on you. You want to keep it under 70 so you don't get those off flavors. And then after everything starts coming down, you can turn the fan off and you can go with your house temperature at below 70.
This is ale.
This is ale. Yes, this is ale. This is not how I would do a lager. Absolutely not. I can't keep my house at 52 degrees. That ain't gonna happen. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you, Chuck. So a couple of points that I want to hit on is just like he said, keep the t-shirt or towel or whatever submerged into the water. That's important because the wicking action, that's what keeps it wet all the time. The other thing is the benefit of like I usually don't have to use a fan because I can keep the temperatures right about where I want, but the thermal mass, okay, I'm not a scientist, I'm a car detailer, right? That's what I do for a living. I detail cars. So if I use a big word that just seems like out of there, and if there's somebody that knows a better term for it, some scientists correct me. But the thermal mass, you've taken 5 gallons of beer and you've added, at least in my tote, about 7 gallons of water to the outside of that. So now you have 12-ish gallons of liquid. The energy it takes to change that up and down is a lot more than just 5 gallons by itself. Okay? So that helps with the spikes up and down, meaning the temperature of the room during the day, this weekend, right, when it was 1,000,000 degrees, the air is going to be super hot. Well, it takes longer. So just putting it in a swamp cooler without a fan, just that's going to help with these spikes, highs and lows. The other thing is about taking temperatures. I just put my thermometer right in that water because of the same reason I just mentioned. Sure, the temperature of the beer right in the very center of the mass of that carboy might be a a degree or two higher than the temperature clear out at the outside. But I can promise you, through many times of testing, the temperature of that water is the temperature of that beer. Unless you just threw ice in it or something, okay? So when you come home from work and you're testing that temperature, it's gonna be the same within a degree or two Fahrenheit, okay? Okay, so we spend a lot of time on swamp coolers, but it's because it's the most effective, cheapest way to do it. And Chuck has made 1 million award-winning beers doing it this way, and it's not expensive, right? I mean, it's about as cheap as it gets. It's self-contained, it's not gonna spill, it's good in every way. All right, so we're gonna move on. So now we're getting up here expensive, man. Now we're up into the $30 range. Now, these, just because I'm education chair doesn't mean I know everything, all things. It just means that I've Googled stuff and talked to brewers. So I have personally never used any of these methods, but there are other ways to heat your beer if you need to, and they have them here at Steinbart's too. Heating pads that you put the carboys right. Has anybody used any of these 3 methods? I'm sure there's somebody has.
Not been successful with them.
So Bruce, which one?
The middle one, the coil wrap. But
This
I
guy?
don't really coil wrap it. I put it inside a refrigerator, a little dorm refrigerator. So, and I have a temperature control thing.
So you put it in a refrigerator that way for insulation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can heat the refrigerator, or it can cool it.
Cool it or heat it, yeah. So I do know a drawback, what I read anyway, about this one, the Brew Belt, is they say you're not supposed to use it on glass. I assume that's because of temperature change. You know, if you have one little strip of hot area on glass and the rest is cold, that's not good. I guess it can crack. But these are definitely methods. Anybody else have personal experience with these?
The brew belt, I ended up sort of just stretching out on the ground and setting the carboys on top of it, just provide a little bit of heat
Yeah.
to slightly heat my lockers at the end of the session to ferment the stuff ahead.
For a diacetyl rest or whatever, yeah. John?
I've used like the swamp cooler like you had before, but we'll put a small aquarium submersible heater in it and set it down in 65, 66-ish.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
it'll
so
keep
to
it nice.
warm, yeah, we were talking primarily about cooling in a swamp cooler, but it works in the opposite.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you were putting,
maintain that temperature.
you were putting a mat like this?
No, an actual aquarium heater.
Oh, an aquarium heater. Oh, yeah. Inside.
Yeah, the glass is like a
okay.
submersible one.
You
just a
home
small
brewers
one.
are so creative, man. I looked at Michelle.
Yeah, instead of buying an expensive brew heater pad, you could go on Craigslist and find somebody who's gotten rid of their waterbed heater. Because I use it in my garden early. If I plant something early and they get a cold spell, I'll flip that thing on and it'll bring the temperature up. So,
And then you put your carboy on top of that, on top of your tomatoes, and it's just all. So the thing,
But this probably is $30 and you can buy one of those for 10 or 12 on
for cheap, yeah.
Yeah.
Now I haven't used these because I haven't really had the need. One thing I would, if someone said, Jason, you must use one of these the next beer you make, the first thing that's gonna concern me is, how do I keep it from getting too warm? If I just plug this sucker in, you know, is there a temperature control or whatever on that? So you definitely wanna make
That's
sure.
the experience I have with the heater pad, and again, back to the mass that you're dealing with. It's difficult, because you're applying that heat to the very bottom of it, which that's where most of your heat is, and then you're trying to heat from the bottom up, and you end up really overheating.
Too warm, yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
So experiment, but. Next one is a cool zone. I haven't used this personally, but I spoke to the owner of the company last year down in San Diego when we were down there. Remember that, Campbell's? How awesome was that? With the scallop burritos? that we went-
Yes.
Okay, so this is just another step up. You can see the price, $150 to $340 depending on your options. The concept here is, this is an insulated tub that you put your carboy into, your fermenter. And then there are coils that go from here into your tub of ice. So you have to supply this full of ice water. And then with an aquarium pump and a heating mat, you can make it hot or cold if you go for the $340 option. So there's a temperature controller that goes into the beer. So if you go for the Cadillac version, then you can cool it with the cold water. Aquarium pump cycles it through. If it gets too cold, it'll shut that off and then turn on the wrap and heat it back up again. I looked seriously at one of these because I thought, wow, that's kind of a good way to just control everything. I ended up not going with it just because I had other methods, bigger and badder things that I kind of wanted to do. And you could only do one carboy at a time. And then you're still having to monitor this ice water thing. You still leave for work on a 100-degree day and then come home and go, crap, I didn't put enough ice in it. It sucked all the heat out of it. But still, when temperatures are not too extreme, I think it's probably not a bad system. If you've got a 5-gallon system that you're using, and then over here, I know you can't really read it, but all the different options that they have for prices and what you get with them and whatnot. I can tell you the owner of the company is super nice. They're dedicated to making a quality product, meaning all the stuff that was included, I was impressed. The guy was really, really on it. So, the Brew Jacket Immersion. This is Chuck's territory again.
All right, so for years when I was brewing, I never did a lager. Because a lager, I needed a refrigerator, a dedicated refrigerator, or a dedicated cooler, and I didn't have the room for it. Anybody out there like that? Don't have the room for this kind of stuff? Maybe you don't have a garage, you don't have the space. I
don't even have room to take care of your glasses.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Keith. Gosh, maybe get me home, that'd be good too. So this is perfect if you're in a small environment, you don't have a lot of room to brew a lager, but you want to brew a lager. You don't have a refrigerator where you can put 3 or 4 kegs in the lager. You don't have a big old freeze box where you can have 5 or 6 lagers. This is 5 gallons at a time, and I've been using this for over a year now. This is a Kickstarter program that started about a year and a half ago. So what it is, it's a 5-gallon carboy. You brew your wort like you would on any brew day. Alright, and you got your yeast, you got your lager yeast going, your starter. What happens is that when you drop this rod into the wort, it's a heat sink. And on top of that rod is that electronic device. It's like a big, like in your computer, where you have your fan on top of your computer chip. It's pulling the heat off. This is the same concept. So when that carboy is inside that jacket, wrapped up, whatever the temperature is in that jacket will be pretty consistent, won't change rapidly, and that fan on top will maintain your temperature. So I brewed one on last Thursday, and I added the yeast in at about 65 degrees. The wort was at 65. On top of that heat sink here, I pushed some buttons up there. It's all electronics. I hit 52, and about 8 hours later, that wort was at 52 degrees, and it's been at 52 degrees since about last Friday. And it's fermenting away. Where's it fermenting? In my closet. It's fermenting in my closet with the door shut. Yeah, there's a little noise from the fan turning on and off, but I don't need a special cooler. And now, this is a little more expensive option because you're only doing 5 gallons at a time.
Does it plug in?
Yes. It plugs into the wall. It's an electrical outlet that drives that fan unit on top. And it works good.
Is there also a compressor in it?
Nope, there's absolutely no compressor. So
the heat,
the heat's being pulled out by the fan on top of this unit and being expelled.
so it's just metal all the way down.
Yes, it's a titanium coated rod that goes down into your wort, almost to the very bottom of this carboy. And you can there's a seal up here, you can adjust how far it drops in your carboy, because there's different size 5-gallon carboys. Some have kind of big dips in the middle, and some aren't very deep.
Yeah, but you said 58 degrees. You mean your house is 58? I mean,
No. So I actually put the wort in. The wort I cooled to 65. I put the yeast in at 65. I cooled this down to 52. It's been at 52 since. It dropped from 65 to 52 in about 10 hours. And it's been sitting at 52 for the last 7 days.
well, is
It's a heat
air over the
exchanger.
thing at 52 or lower?
It's a heat exchanger, so it'll
Yeah.
draw more heat out of the liquid than ambient temperature. So without a compressor, with the air movement, you can reach a certain delta beyond ambient, and so he couldn't freeze the beer with it, but he could drop. I don't know what the range is. Probably 20 degrees below ambient, or 20.
I can take this beer down to 37 degrees and a half.
Wow.
In my closet, in the house that's at 70, I've taken it down to 37 degrees. Yeah. So at the time, and you do a diacetyl rest with this too, because all you do is raise the temperature up here, set it at 62 degrees, pull the carboy down a little bit, the jacket around the carboy, and it'll slowly heat up. After about 3 days, it'll come up to 63 degrees. Leave it there for 3 days, and then wrap it all back up and drop it back down to chilling temperature. At that point, I usually drop it to about 42 before I transfer it into my refrigerator in the garage when I want to cold crash it.
Do you have any idea why you use this, or the
The electrical usage? Not a clue. But I know that fan's going, it's constantly going, kind of like the fan that you got in the back of your PC. It's just a little louder, it is a bigger fan. I don't know what the usage is, honestly. But if you don't have a garage, you're in an apartment, you're in a studio apartment, and you want to be able to brew a lager, this is an awesome opportunity and option to do. It costs about $250 to get in. The later Kickstarter program on this now has a new head they're going to release in September that not only cools but heats. Cools down and heats up. That's their latest Kickstarter. And it's coming out in September.
The jacket, does that come with it? Is
Yes.
it one size? How can it be? Like if you have sort of a taller carboy versus a squat
Well,
carboy?
they do a one-size jacket. It's made for about a 6-gallon carboy. Plastic carboy comes with it. So does the rod and the heating element on top. The other thing too to maintain the temperature is coming out of this head unit is a wire that you tape to the side of the plastic carboy as you set it inside the jacket. That's how it monitors the temperature of the wort as it's fermenting. It's a wire that's about that long. And it works pretty good. So I've brewed like, I think I'm on my 5th lager right now since last summer doing this. And it was an easy way for me to get into lagers because I didn't have the room for a big refrigerator. I didn't have a room for a big cooler, an ice cooler that I can do a lager in. And you can do this in any studio apartment. You could do this in the campers or traveling across country.
Thank you, Chuck. Next, we've got to move along in the interest of time. So, I should have put this one before. Another option is called the installation jacket, 65 bucks. Does anybody have one of these? Do you like it?
I hate it.
Yeah. See, the more I read about it, it was like it's just an insulator that you throw ice into.
Yeah, it leaks.
And it leaks. Yeah. So, yeah, it's insulating, and then you throw something in it. Some real basic stuff here. Temperature controllers. Russ is going to get more into this. This slide is meant to show the couple different kinds. There's a digital one and an analog one. The analog one, the picture's getting cut off here. I want you to just see a little probe on the right, the little copper thing. That's what is the temperature, the thermometer. So here's the temperature controller right here. That looks very familiar. I've got one of those. So these are just 2 different ways. See, that's a thermometer. 2 different ways to control temperatures. So just as a basic thing, like I said, Russ is going to get more into this. But if you've never used a temperature controller, here's basically how they work. Is you take your device that you are controlling the temperature in. In my case, it's a refrigerator. Usually it's a fridge or a freezer. You plug this into the wall, plug your refrigerator into that. This has a switch in here, and then it will determine when to turn it on or turn it off based on the temperature of the, I've got my laser, I'm standing right in the middle, based on that little, is that called a thermocouple?
Yes.
God, yeah. Sometimes things stick. Okay, so the thermoprobe couple, and then the temperature that you've dialed in. Now, I still have one of these analog ones just because it came with the system I bought, but I also have another fridge with one of these digital ones, like Russ has, and it's awesome. So this is a 2-way, I can control heat and cool So when it comes on, you just program it in. And then this picture on the other side is just a picture of it being executed in a refrigerator. So see, he's got a refrigerator, he's got a temperature controller up here with a probe in here with the temperature, with the thermometer, just like Chuck was talking about on the side, so it knows the temperature of your beer, and then turns the fridge off or on accordingly. I messed this up.
It was balancing.
Okay, then there's the build your own. How did I mess that up? John, you had it just right. Build your own fermentation chambers. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but these are guys that are just so industrious, they don't want to go buy a pre-made chest freezer, so they build their own. Plywood, yeah, plywood with insulation on it, all sealed up. It seals well, and then all the electronic controls. This one over here, look at that dude right there. What is that? That's a wall air conditioner.
Craigslist, man.
That's right, Craigslist. You plug it in, now all those carboys are nice and cold. So there's different options for building your own. And then the fancy ones here, the refrigerators or chest freezers.
I love that.
This is kind of my setup, not the expensive fancy one. I have a refrigerator and a freezer that I've converted like this and put temperature controllers on them so I can cool things down as needed. This one over here on the right, see, it's got both. It's got that little space heater, and then it's also a freezer so it can be cooled, so it goes up and down. I personally don't see the need, I don't need both heat and cooling, so I just do cooling.
You can't use that temperature controller that you showed earlier. That's a single
One
device.
phase, right.
You can get temperature controllers that will switch either hot or
Either way. Yeah, there's temperature controllers, right, that just switch off and on, which means they control one device, or there's ones that control both. This one on the left I just brought because it's just so freaking cool how cool that temperature controller is. I mean, look, it's got right there, it's got his stainless conicals in there.
conical fermenters.
Over here, I mean, it's just really cool.
We're going to talk about that system.
So anyway, okay, so I'm done. Russ is up next.
Okay. Personally, I'm the least laziest, really lazy person you'll meet. All right. I like to project, but not have to run downstairs and check if there's water in the bucket and check my temperature twice a day and remember to do those. I just don't have the brain for that. You know, when I can focus on a project, I want to build something that then does everything I want it to do for me afterwards. So, you know, going back for a sec, I can go back. You know, these are great, and I own one. So I have, well, I guess I have 3 different temperature control chambers. So I have my kegerator, which was the first thing that I built, and I bought, you know, just a Ranco temperature controller, which you could use for a fermentation chamber or a kegerator. Probably there's a bunch of people in the room that have these. They're really easy. So one probe, and you know, I wired in a $5 surge strip so I could plug more than one thing in for no good reason. And I spent, I think, $50 or something on this box because it comes in a box with a little screen all set up for me. And I didn't know what I was doing. So this whole thing probably cost me $65 after shipping or something like that. And it can keep my kegerator at a temperature. And it turns it on and turns it off just like we talked about. This one might do hot and cold, but I've never used it for that, so I don't remember. Then I learned you don't actually have to spend $70 to do that kind of temperature control. So, 2 ways to control temperature that we didn't really talk too much about is one, we can control the ambient temperature, right? What's the temperature of the air? Or we can control the temperature of the beer. And the cheap way, and what we've talked about so far, and what we'll talk about with this, is just controlling the temperature of the air. Right, and so if we have a room that we want to keep at 62 degrees, do we really need to cool the entire room or an entire house? Or can we figure out a way to do it in a smaller box? Buying a refrigerator is a good way to do it if you have a refrigerator big enough for your carboy. If you don't, I got some foam board insulation and some 1x2, and I built a little frame, and I just stuck, you know, cheap foam board from Home Depot insulation to it, and I cut a hole in one side. I bought a $25 dorm fridge at a garage sale, fitted into that hole, took one of those little ceramic heaters, put that in the chamber. And so I think I was into it at that point for $35 or something like that. And then I bought one of these for $9.99, $11.99, something like that. And a little project box from Lowe's for 12 bucks. And that was pretty much my expense. And I built a temperature-controlled fermentation chamber that will heat or cool the ambient temperature. So I don't want to check twice a day. I want to set my temperature on the little screen at 62 degrees or 58 degrees or whatever it is. If I'm lagering, I can set it at 50 degrees, and then when I'm ready for my diacetyl rest, I just go down and turn it up to 65 degrees, let the temperature rise over a couple of days. The ambient temperature will hold there. So since beer exotherms, we have issues if we're just controlling ambient temp of really dialing in that beer temperature, right? Because it'll try to overheat and it takes time to react, and if you're just changing the air temperature, how fast does that thermal mass of beer really react to those air temperature changes? And with a system like this, typically, you can either just measure the ambient or you can stick the probe to the side, but you're still going to have a lot of delayed reaction. There's no intelligence, it's just trying to hold a flat temp. So then you get to dual probe control, and this is fun. So what I did was I got a full-on refrigerator, right? And I was lucky enough to find one on Craigslist that didn't have a freezer. So it's really nice. It's just all one old school fridge. I think I spent $125 or something like that on it. This is the most expensive setup we'll talk about. And I set up a BrewPie system. So if you're not familiar with BrewPie, BrewPie is an open source application designed for beer temperature control. And really focused on fermentation temperature control, although people are using it for mashing algorithms now, and there's more coming along in that community, and if you code it all, you can really get involved in it and geek out on it. I don't code. So realize that what I'll talk about is simple enough for somebody that is IT savvy, but isn't by any stretch a Linux or Unix person, was able to set up the entire system and control it from my iPad. So here we have two temperature controls. One in the beer. So we've talked about measuring kind of the ambient temperature of the outside. My feeling is if you really want the most accurate temperature, get the core temperature of the beer. And then figure out how to wire it with a wiring diagram and no clue what you're doing.
Been there.
And so I went inside the fridge and I pulled the coils out and I found the thermostat, because they hid a wiring diagram in the back of the fridge somewhere, and I figured out what was a thermostat, and I cut it out, and wired in some an SSR, a solid state relay, right? So for 10, 12 bucks, you can get these little things that you pretty much put in line that are switches, right? That you can control from a source. And I bought a web server. So why do we need a pie to make a beer? And so if you start panicking as to why do you need a web server, realize it's just this, right? So there's a couple of different versions of the Raspberry Pi, but that's what this thing is. And it, want to say I bought the Raspberry Pi 2 because, well, if there's a 2, why would you buy the 1? So I think it was $50 or something like that, 50, 60 bucks. Was able to get that set up relatively easily. They give you instructions, right? Type this command. Type this command. So if you can read and type, you're good. And then if you can Google whatever error message pops up, you're really good. And so my goal was to be able to really control the temperature of my beer. So what you don't see is this. And so this is the BrewPie Spark. This is what's called a photon board that connects to my little web server here. And then the two probes, so I have, if you go back, I have a probe in the beer, right? So that's telling me, am I at the temperature I want to be? Then I have a probe in the fridge that sits right here, and this is a weird fridge. Right in here is the condenser coil that you saw, so the cooling is all coming from here. The back wall of this fridge is hollow, and there's a vent on top and a vent on bottom, and when this is running and the fridge is on, it pulls air through. So it's a really cool convection current that's used throughout. However, when my heater turns on, one of the brew pads that you saw earlier, so it's just a little 25-watt brew pad sitting on the bottom, this isn't on. And rather than getting crazy with the wiring, I just wired in a little computer fan just that runs the whole time the chamber is running, just to keep the air circulating so that I can control the ambient temperature. And then I took a couple of pieces of ABS, just ABS pipe, and cut it off so that I added extra support underneath the rack for the fridge, because fridges aren't meant to hold 10 gallons of beer in glass containers. So, what?
Or 15.
Or 15. So I can comfortably fit 10 gallons of beer in here. You know, we've talked about the brew jackets and stuff. I can comfortably fit 30 gallons of beer in my other ambient chamber. So if you're looking for kind of your maximum space, although I don't think I've ever put more than 10, 15 gallons in either one, you know, these are ways to kind of expand that capacity. And I got the stopper and thermowell right here at Steinbart's for a couple of bucks to drop in there. So what this is doing is it's monitoring the temperature here. It's feeding it back into the controller. Now this is you can buy this from BrewPie, or you can buy what's called an Arduino board. If you're familiar at all, you can essentially get a little circuit board that does almost all the same stuff for less than I don't know what they go for now, but you can probably find them for 50 bucks. And put this system together. If you were 125 on the fridge, figure another 30 in relays and probes, and then 60, 200. You probably get away for 250 or so putting something like this together. If you do the Arduino, which is it's a slower board. So if you're forward thinking and you go, well, they're writing more code and I'm going to be able to do more stuff and I'm going to hook more things up to it in the future that I have no idea what they're going to do, but I want to be able to monitor them, you can spend 150 bucks and get the cute little box that's a little bit faster. Again, I have no clue why I did it, but I just wanted to be able to do the next thing. Right, if you're going to do it, do it. So the company is based over in like Denmark or something like that, and also, you know, this is how that company makes money, and they give away the software, so it's pretty awesome to support them. Once you get it set up, it turns on the fridge and turns on the heater with intelligence. It's a PID system, if you're familiar with that, with some really nice interface and graphing software. So what I can do is I can say, I want to hold 60, or if I'm in a lager, I want to hold 52 degrees for the next 13 days, and then I want to do a diacetyl rest at 65 degrees for 21 and a half hours. And then I want to cold crash down to 38 degrees and hold there for 3 weeks. And I can pre-program all of that, turn it on, walk away. And it will hold within 1/10 of 1 degree C, sometimes varying to 2/10 of 1 degree C. And that's all the variance I get over the entire fermentation. And I can monitor from my iPad. And post things like this to Facebook. Why?
Very cool.
Because, you know, I have friends that brew, and so we go, that's really cool. And so you can see, I mean, unfortunately, I don't have it set up right now because I'm in the process of moving, so I couldn't take an active screenshot, but this was from one of my test runs. And you can see, I pretty much said, I want to raise the temperature a couple of degrees over the next 2 days, and this is the temperature of the chamber, being intelligent to the fluctuations in the core beer temperature and adjusting to hold that core beer temperature the entire way through. So if you really want to get crazy about it and be able to really manage that temperature and do it in advance and watch it, and if you really want to get crazy, throw a little webcam in there and then you can actually look at your beer. That would be the next step. They're not quite at the point where it'll do specific gravity readings. What I really wanted to do was set up specific gravity measurements and be able to do a diacetyl rest when I hit a certain point. And that stuff isn't quite there yet.
There's stuff out there that will do that. It's close.
Yeah, I've read a bunch of those threads and I haven't found anything that people like, this works well consistently. So they have the floats and... So, all right.
Take some questions, Ross.
Sure.
So questions about this?
Well, I've got one probe way down in the center of the beer, and then the other one where the coldest air kind of comes up out of the vent so that I get the fastest reaction time. Because the PID controller is going to want to predict the swing, so it wants to minimize the overshoot.
Did you attach it to the side and look at the difference?
No. I think it would probably, I think two things. One, it depends on what you'd have to take some measurements to see what the true delta is between the core temperature and the outer temperature. But I know that on my other system, if I take a core temp difference, I get a kind of 3 degree or so, 3-4 degree temperature difference of the beer to ambient. So I don't trust the outside of the beer, because you'd have to super insulate that, the probe away from the ambient air. Otherwise, any air current is going to throw that temperature. And by the time, I used to do that in my kegerator, is I would have a rag with a band, and so when I put a beer in there, I put the probe in there, and this way I always had 38 degrees, or because I figured by 38 degrees I could pour a beer and go upstairs and sit for a minute and it'd get to 42 degrees. That would be the perfect drinking temperature. I just now throw the probe in the kegerator and it's all good.
That's a good point though, Russ, you say. When we talk about putting a probe on the outside of your keg or carboy or whatever, that's better than nothing, but insulating the outside of that is super if you're going to do that. Because like Russ said, any air current then is going to influence that probe. So you have to at least insulate it a little bit.
And I haven't put a camera in the system, although I might. So I look at my beer. I'm going to open up the chamber, and I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to see if I see activity, right? I'm going to look at the airlock and see if I see bubbles, and I'm going to want to take a gravity to kind of figure out where I'm at. And if I have a probe on the outside, and I open or close, I'm measuring the air temperature. There is going to be more effect, and so I'll have more short cycling or anything else. Whereas if I'm taking that temperature from the core of the beer, I'm taking beer temp every single time. Right. So, just different ways of doing it. Just like in your mash tun, you might have probes in different spots or measure at different volumes, and you want to avoid that stratification, and you'll get more of it. You talked about the heater pad right underneath, superheating the bottom, which is why in that setup I don't have that heat
on the bottom of the core.
No,
it's just ambient within the chamber.
Yeah, I've got a good 8 inches or so there between the pad and the beer, and I can move my temperature. You never want to move it that far that fast, so I can move it a couple of degrees a day easily with that setup, and I can do it to 10 gallons of beer with one pad.
So I might make one suggestion if you don't want to go as far as, dual temp probes, one in the beer, one ambient, all that. What I do in my system is I've actually taken a bottle, it's like a 750 milliliter bottle with just a flip top on it, filled that with liquid, and I have my temp probe. Oh, can everybody hear me? That temp probe is actually inside the bottle itself, which is filled with liquid. So that change that's happening, if you're opening it up, you're not going to cause a temperature change of the ambient you'll cause the ambient temperature to change, but not that bottle that's down there that has your temp probe sitting inside of it. And it's not quite the same mass that your beer is, but it's at least a mass, so you're getting closer to adjusting the temperature of the beer. So if there's any cheaper suggestion I have, that's one way to go. It seems to work pretty well for me.
I do that in my storage fridge, and I have a separate wine fridge that I use just for cellaring, and so I keep I drilled a hole in a stopper top, and I keep water in that bottle with the thermometer in it that I just leave in there, and this way I can make sure I'm at 52 degrees storage temp every single time, and I don't get that effect. Anything else?
So we done? I want to say thank you to Russ and Chuck. Let's get an applause for those two for this knowledge.